Welcome to the I Told You So podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Cole. I started this podcast because I noticed an erosion of societal discourse and how normal conversations are often fueled by polarization. The I Told You So podcast offers an opportunity for healthy discourse and effective debate. I select topics to discuss and debate with listeners and guests of the I Told You So podcast. Listeners and guests predict what will happen in the future. I track predictions and announce who predicted accurately when those predictions become true. The podcast offers topics where listeners and guests can discuss and debate with the goal of predicting the future so they can proudly say, I told you so. On this episode, my guest is Dr. Blake Flanders. Dr. Flanders serves as president and CEO for the Kansas Board of Regents, which is the governing board of the state's 6 universities and the statewide coordinating board for the state's 32 public higher education institutions. As president and CEO, Dr. Flanders oversees the implementation of the board's strategic goals and manages the day-to-day operations of the board office. He directs the implementation of the board's strategic plan for public higher education in Kansas, centered on families, businesses, and economic prosperity. Prior to serving as the president and CEO of the Kansas Board of Regents, Dr. Flanders was the vice president for workforce development for the Board of Regents. He has also served as the vice president of instructional services at Manhattan Area Technical College in Manhattan, Kansas, and as a member of the faculty at Butler Community College, also in Kansas. Dr. Flanders is a graduate of Colby Community College and Kansas State University, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Animal Science and a master's degree of science in animal science and a doctoral degree in curriculum and instruction. On this episode, Dr. Blake Flanders and I discuss the ways in which higher education can adapt to a continually changing landscape and meet the needs of individuals, families, employers, communities, and the economy. So, Dr. Flanders, thank you for joining me today. Let me start our conversation with a question to you. So, as we look forward together, do you expect that there will be more or less importance for Kansas to earn some kind of degree or credential beyond a high school diploma?
Well, thank you, Ben, and thank you for the invitation to be on the podcast. Thank you for having it with this kind of framework where now I've got a little pressure where I'm going to predict some things, and then you're going to go back and see if those were correct. So, we've had several studies that have been done on the workforce, and all of those are predictions, and there's usually generally ranges. And those economists that make those predictions are certainly safeguarding those by saying, it's certainly a range. But I think whether or not you look at the University of Kansas Institute for has done a study for the board, as well as national studies by the Georgetown Center of Education and Workforce. All of those studies really come together, and they might predict a different number of jobs that require post-secondary, but they certainly all show that the need for post-secondary education and credentials for workers in Kansas is increasing. And it's really increasing at a relatively alarming rate. As we looked at the economy, we see that Kansas is going to add about 54,000 new jobs by 2030. Now, those aren't replacement jobs. Those would be jobs new to the economy. If you say about 54,000, it could be anywhere from, maybe 40,000 to 65,000. So there'd be a range there. But of those new jobs, 80% will not only require post-secondary credential, but 80% will require a baccalaureate degree or higher. So that's a significant acceleration of the education that's needed by our Kansas employers and also our individual Kansans seeking employment.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about those jobs. I think there's going to be another 180,000 jobs in Kansas. So help me understand more about kind of the expectations there for the workforce.
Yeah, so I think as you look at those jobs, many of the replacing jobs might require some post-secondary credentials. So what do I mean by that? I'm really thinking there about many of our technical jobs. So to become a welder, you likely won't need a baccalaureate degree, but you probably need some training beyond high school. Whether or not that's an HVAC technician or whether or not that's a job in construction. And we're going to be building, there's going to be an incredible need for that technical workforce. But one thing we're also seeing, again, is that a baccalaureate prepared workforce is going to be incredibly important for the Kansas economy as well. And really it's just a function of the need for skills accelerating in the workforce. So as you hear about things like AI influencing the workforce and all of these factors coming in, what it's really done is almost every change that we've seen really from the 1950s on has increased the skill level that is needed. You even think about an automotive technician that in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s were working on cars. Well, that engine in a car and the way that car is put together today is much different than it was 30, 40 years ago. So, it might have, most of the time it took a mechanic 10% of the time to diagnose the problem, and 90% of the time was spent fixing the problem. And really those ratios have just flipped, where now the analysis takes some more time, and really the repair may not take as much time, but it does require an individual to have higher skills just based on the amount of reading that's required, the amount of study that's required, and really what you're doing is fixing a computer at the end of the day. So, I see even jobs that may not require a baccalaureate degree, the skills of those jobs have increased. And for Kansas to have the highest producing economy that we can, we're going to need individuals that have those skills.
So what are some, I guess, researched articles or reports that you utilize beyond what you know in your office and with the Board of Regents? Do you kind of reach out to other universities and kind of compare data? Like, for instance, do you maybe use the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce? Are you kind of looking at trends across the United States? Or are you really focused and honed in on Kansas only?
Yeah, so we are focused on Kansas in terms of number of graduates that our systems produce. We've had probably less success as a state recruiting a workforce. Some states, their strategy has been to recruit a skilled workforce into the state rather than try to prepare that workforce in their own university or college system. And that probably works better for states that might have oceanfront property or maybe the Rocky Mountains to ski in. That has shown some success. But what I believe in Kansas, and I think most Kansans believe, is we're going to need to retain the workforce that we have. We've got a tremendous work ethic in this state, and then we're going to have to create that into from our college and university system. And there's no better recruiter of talent than our colleges and university. For every high school student that might leave the state to attend college in a different state, we recruit twice as many back in to attend. So if we can retain that workforce, that's really going to help the Kansas economy. Now, this isn't just going, you said, do you look at other states as well? We do. So this trend isn't just going on in Kansas. The state of Texas where we do have some graduates go to work, and it is really much larger than Kansas. They're going to add over 1 million jobs by 2030 that require education beyond high school. Colorado is going to add a couple 100,000. So it's not just Kansas, the entire region is going to be adding these jobs. And if we want to do what's right for Kansas families and individual Kansans, we need to be sure that they have some post-secondary attainment in their portfolio and within their resume, so they can secure some of these jobs.
Do you work with high schools? Does the Kansas Board of Regents work with high schools and high school administrators to focus on what you're learning about what the workforce is needing and kind of almost working backwards? Like, this is what we need in the future, but we need to really start preparing these students in high school to take that next step into a post-secondary education opportunity. So is there cooperation and collaboration with high schools?
Certainly, and much of my work is done obviously with the Commissioner of Education, Randy Watson, and so we work together on that, and that's one area where we think we can have improvement, and we think we can add additional talent to the workforce and really help individual Kansans. Is that in the past we've really maybe taken for granted a little bit the transition that students have between graduating from high school and enrolling in college. And so when you're in a high school environment, it's much more, maybe I'd say custodial, in that many of your needs are met. And in fact, the law requires them to meet many of those needs. Then you go off to college and you're a little bit on your own, where you're making, and that's not necessarily a bad thing as you're transitioning into adulthood if you're a traditional age student, but you have many things to do on your own. So how do we smooth that transition? One way that we're really, one way that we think that can be effective is to begin delivering even more credit-based college courses in high school. So how do we get students started earlier, earning college credit, and as they take those credits, they know themselves, hey, college is for me. I can do college. I can be successful. And then we can more easily transition them into post-secondary enrollment. Because many times, if your parents didn't go to college and you don't have members in your family that graduated from college, you may not know how to navigate easily through the system. And that's something that we want to bring to Kansas. We do a number of those concurrent courses or those courses in high school now. We'd like to increase that. And then additionally, we also have a blueprint for literacy initiative. So even beyond high school, we're training and retraining teachers in the science of reading and those practices, so we can have higher literacy rates in Kansas. Because here's what we know: if you struggle reading, you're likely going to struggle in this economy. You're going to struggle picking up those secondary skills. You're going to struggle in high school, and you're going to have difficulty across a number of subjects. So if we can have early interventions, we think those investments can really pay off later down the line.
Yeah. So if Kansas is going to need more workers with post-secondary credentials, how will Kansas prepare for that future when Kansas currently has a gap in the number of graduates and the anticipated demand for credentialed workers?
Yeah, so if we just looked at Ben, that's a good question. If we just looked at Kansas and just said, well, we're going to just isolate Kansas, and we think we may be 30 to 40,000 workers short here by 2030. So how do we fill those gaps? So one way is we've got to serve more students from groups that traditionally haven't been served. So if you look at groups of first generation students whose parents didn't go to college, we need to serve more of those students. We need to serve a higher percentage of Hispanic students. who traditionally have been underserved by higher education, minority students. So that one strategy we would have there, as we discussed before, is delivering some of those courses in high school, um, making contact with those students earlier and showing them you can be successful in higher education, and we will map a pathway where we can be sure that it's affordable and that you have the right student services that you can succeed. But there's also another group of individuals that I think could be a good target to really increase our post-secondary attainment. And those are those individuals out there that have some college but no degree. So maybe they, some of them have up to 90 credit hours. Maybe they have 60 credit hours. Maybe they have an associate degree and they want to move forward to a baccalaureate degree, or maybe they went to college for 3 years and then life happened and they had to stop out, and they might be in their early 40s. And so how do we, there's over 300,000 of those individuals out there. So, how do we look at contacting those, making sure that they have opportunities to easily get back in? And how do we reduce those friction points just to make it easier for them to complete that education? Because we're going to have to do more than just focus on current high school graduates if we're going to meet these goals and meet this talent demand that the Kansas economy is going to have.
Yeah, so let's talk about what some call the demographic cliff, the enrollment drop from high school to post-secondary education, especially to the four-year institutions. So let's talk about that a little bit. What's your involvement with that? What's the Kansas Board of Regents doing? How is Kansas Board of Regents leading the universities and colleges in the effort to continue to recruit and retain students?
Yeah, so we know those numbers in Kansas. We really haven't seen a large drop in high school graduates. We know those are going to peak in about 2026, and then they'll start dropping. In other areas of the country, other regions of the country, this is already improved. And so we're lagging there. Now, probably the easiest way to improve this is increase the birth rates. We're not going to have much influence over that. But these numbers are just in the system, and we know that this is coming. So what that really means is, again, how are we going to serve a higher percentage of students as opposed to really thinking about just serving a static number of percentage. And then if we are not successful serving a higher percentage of students, we know that those enrollments are going to drop. Now, one thing at the university, we've seen a slight decrease in enrollment. Most of the universities are flat. We actually had the largest freshman class that we've ever had at the University of Kansas last year, so that was a huge success. So it's really been uneven in terms of institutions that have been impacted by down enrollments. The sector that's been impacted by far the had the sharpest impact has been our community colleges. So in our community colleges, we know that we need to turn those enrollments around. We need to strengthen those enrollments because they are serving many of our first generation students is going to be critical. And then the board has really looked at how can we increase access for first generation students, and we've really implemented several strategies to do that. One strategy is to increase need-based student financial aid. Kansas used to really lag other states in the amount of need-based aid that we had to offer to students. And now we've been able to grow that partnership with the help of the governor and the legislature. And so we've been able to increase that the past 3 or 4 years to really help students have college be more affordable. Now, we have known nationally that we've got some issues with the new FAFSA and how that's rolled out, and we're hoping those can smooth out along the way. I know that our financial aid professionals at the universities and colleges are doing everything they can to help students complete those forms and make sure they're ready. Completing that form provides a student access to so many state level programs as well. So it's not just about the federal aid, but we also have a Promise Act where students in high demand majors, if they attend a community or technical college, the state will pay for the last dollar in for those programs. So in other words, if you received a very small amount of aid, the state will pick up the difference to make sure that you can complete that program and take care of those costs. And so completing the FAFSA is so important because it gives you access to those kinds of programs. So we're hopeful that the U.S. Department of Education can get those issues smoothed out and that we can give students better access to those kinds of scholarships.
Yeah.
We've been providing a number of supports to students to help them complete the FAFSA. We have events at the high schools and where parents and counselors and financial aid professionals come together just to really assist families to help with that activity.
That's right. I used to do that when I worked in financial aid at Kansas State University. So if you can improve access and affordability to help more students attend college, what has to be done to ensure those students are positioned to succeed?
Yeah, so we know that access alone isn't enough. We need access with success. And so we started looking around nationally just to see what colleges are doing the best job with maybe first generation students, with minority students. Where are those pockets of success? And we actually found one institution that had done really well, and it was Georgia State University. And they have a National Institute of Student Success. They've been so successful that people began to visit the institution and ask them what they were doing. And so they stood up a National Institute of Student Success. We brought those folks to Kansas. We benchmarked all the universities. I know the community colleges are doing work there as well to say, how can we improve our practices to make sure that students are going to be successful? And the legislature has funded that activity along with the governor. So we certainly thank them for that support. And we have seen upticks then in retention of students. You know, that's a long process, and that's a process that improvement takes time. But that is certainly paying off for our students at our colleges and universities. And then the board has said, are there other friction points that are causing issue? And one of those we kept hearing about was transfer. That some courses, if you were at a community college, didn't transfer to the university. And so we started a transfer and articulation task force. We now have over 120 courses that transfer course to course. So if you take those at a community college, they're going to transfer to the university. But we even went beyond that. We said, well, what about the general education core? How can we have a common core across our universities and community colleges? So that if you take your general education core requirements at a community college, we ensure that those are going to transfer to the university. And so we do. We've just begun implementing that. We've done that work the last 2 years, and we have between 34 and 35 credits across 7 disciplines that are going to be uniform and just easily transfer into the university system. So we think that smoothing those pathways is very important. Then we've even looked at the individual program level. And so just this last year, we looked at an elementary education degree. And we brought the universities together with our community college partners and said, how do we ensure that if someone wants to major in elementary education And maybe they began and they wanted to go to one university, but life happened and they needed to switch to a different one. How do we make sure that those programs, that none of that credit is lost? So we've completed that for elementary education. We're taking those programs 1, 2, and 3 at a time and ensuring that we can smooth transfer there. Because here's what we know. If a student loses credit as they make that transition, they're more likely to drop out. And that's what we want to really avoid.
Oh yeah. So what I guess really good list of what you're doing and what you're working on, and how you're putting student success right in line with access. I think that's great. So what are some areas that you think the colleges and universities can do to help with student success?
So one way that colleges can really help students is to ensure professional advising. So what we know is that sometimes advising can be uneven across the enterprise. And we want to be sure that all of our advisors are trained professionals that can give that great advice to students and be a mentor to students as they come in, and really help them with what we found out is help them with more issues than just the course load, but be able to answer questions and really ensure that they have success. Another area that we discovered through our work with the National Institute of Student Success is sometimes students need a scholarship or a grant late in their educational experience. So they might be a junior or senior and fall just a little short of the dollars that they need to complete that experience. And at times, if they're from a family that may not be able to provide that support, they may just go ahead and drop out and end up in that category of some college and no degree. And so how can we come alongside them maybe later in the experience? So many of our scholarships were traditionally targeted at the freshmen and incoming students. So how do we make sure that we can help them get across the finish line and complete that degree?
Yeah, so let's talk about the connection and the collaboration with the economy in Kansas. So I imagine that Kansas Board of Regents is doing a lot of research or collecting data on reports and listening to the needs of the workforce, listening to the needs of the economy, and then also bringing some of that back and talking to the universities and colleges and those administrators and those deans and department heads about how to meet the needs of the Kansas economy, and maybe even going even as far as the high school. So what's that? I guess what's that process like? If there even is one, I'm assuming there is, where the Kansas Board of Regents is really kind of bringing all those pieces together to ultimately meet those needs and goals of the economy in Kansas.
Yeah. So another way we do that is, we look at our academic program portfolio and say, is that meeting not only the needs of the economy, but the needs of students, and is it in demand by students? And so we've conducted a thorough program review, really in cooperation with the universities, and have kind of changed our program review process to say, do we have an adequate number of majors in the program? Are the median salaries after graduation high enough to really justify someone spending those tuition dollars for this program? We know that a university education is a lot more than just getting a job. We know it provides many additional skills that strengthen communities. But we also know that getting a job is important too. And so that's also one of our metrics. So as we look at those, we've had programs that are now discontinued. We've merged some programs to make them a better fit for student demand. And the universities have really taken that on now. to say we're going to make sure that that portfolio of programs and those choices for students really are ones that are going to really help them as they progress into their career.
Yeah. So over the past, I would say, decade, it seems to me that a lot of families and students are really questioning the return on investment on a post-secondary educational experience, whether that's a technical college experience, community college experience, or 4-year, even graduate program. So they're questioning the value of it. And it seems to me there may be a misconception on what the public thinks and what the public knows about the value of post-secondary education and what the true value actually is. So let's talk about the future of messaging in that realm. What's the Kansas Board of Regents doing to help kind of change the message and actually help to convey the real value and the real truth about higher education?
Yeah, so we have a group right now of presidents here at the board, our university presidents and community college presidents, technical college presidents that are really working around how do we articulate this message in a better way. It doesn't mean it's just about message, because what we have to own is at times, and particularly nationally, we've had graduates who left some, and most of the time it's very exclusive institutions that are very high cost. We don't have incredibly high cost institutions in Kansas, but they've graduated. They might have a debt of $200,000 or $250,000, and they can't find a job that helps to support them and to retire that debt. And so sometimes in popular publications, I'll see a story about that every week. And I think, that's going to be hard to combat because that gets then in the public domain, and it just becomes fact after a while. In Kansas, we have almost 30% of our graduates that graduate and have zero debt. So they didn't borrow anything to go to college and have a degree. And then of those that have some debt, of those graduates, I believe the last numbers I've seen was around $26,000. And so I think most people would say that's a manageable debt load. When I have a college degree that maybe now I can be an engineer and my starting salary is over $60,000. And so I can start to build that career. After 5 years, I'm going to make over $100,000. And that those investments with that small amount of debt seem to be ones that would be a wise financial decision. So how do we tell the Kansas story in the broader context of sometime this national story that's not as favorable to us? And that really is one of our challenges.
Yeah. So last question. What does the future of higher education look like in Kansas and maybe even nationally? And maybe you can think of, when you're thinking about how to answer that question, maybe you can think of if-then statements, like if such and such happens, then this is what higher education looks like. If such and such doesn't happen, then this is what higher education looks like. So maybe give the listeners an idea of where you think higher education is going.
Yeah. So if higher education remains very traditional and is the higher education maybe that we all accessed 30 and 40 years ago, then higher education is going to become a much smaller enterprise. Because we're going to have smaller high school graduation classes. So if our focus is only on high school graduates, then higher education is going to be much smaller. If higher education broadens the appeal, if higher education becomes more friendly to adults that have some college and no degree, becomes easier to access when you're in the workforce and you need to reskill or upskill, offers more than just traditional 2- and 4-year degrees, but also some educational badges or shorter term credentials, then higher education is going to expand and be more relevant than ever before. Because what we know is the skills needed in the workforce are not going to go backwards. We're not going to ever go into needing a less skilled workforce. We're automated to the point with AI, machine learning, and all of those components that are going to continue to increase the skills of this workforce. So I'm bullish on the future for higher education because I know we're making those changes right now that are going to position us to serve more students, but maybe serve the population differently. We're going to be defining maybe graduates, not just necessarily as graduates with a four-year degree, but perhaps graduates that might have, achieved that short-term credential, that educational badge. The traditional student that we think about, many of those students might be 40 years old, 50 years old, mid-career. Maybe they're back for a shorter amount of time, and they come back multiple times in their career. And so, I see a lot of change coming to higher education. I think it's already beginning. I think the Kansas institutions are well positioned to be a part of that and to help lead.
That's great. So, Dr. Blake Flanders, thanks so much for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. If listeners want to learn more, you can certainly visit the Kansas Board of Regents website, and that's at kansasregents.org. That's all one word, kansasregents.org, or you can send an email message, and then Dr. Flanders will get that. And that's at regents@ksbor.org. That's regents, REGENTS, at ksbor.org. So because this podcast is about predicting the future, so my questions to the listeners are I've got a couple. And so what role do you think colleges and universities play in preparing the workforce for the future? And what can colleges and universities do to better serve students and families and employers? So let me know. I'd love to know. You can send a text message to me or send an email to me. You can also call me. If you want to call me or text, you can do that at 785-473-3721, or send an email message to ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com, or post on any of my social media channels. So I do ask you to go to the I Told You So podcast website at BenKohlITYS.com. It's my name, BenKohlITYS.com. And then you can go there to connect and get your own I Told You So items if you wish. We have a merchandise link there. You can get shirts and hats and hoodies and coffee mugs and lots of other items. The I Told You So podcast is a space for healthy discourse and effective debate with the goal of predicting the future so you can proudly say, I told you so. So also, if your business or organization is interested in advertising on the I Told You So podcast, please let me know that too. So thanks for tuning in to the I Told You So podcast. And thanks again to my guest, Dr. Blake Flanders. Followers of the podcast are very important. So please follow, like, subscribe, leave a comment, give a high rating, and share with your friends. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl, and I hope to hear from you soon.